CFL 110, your weekly trip around the biggest stories in the Canadian Football League with Jeff Hamilton and Andrew Hustler Paterson. Presented by Garage Living Winnipeg.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to another edition of CFL 110. Andrew Paterson will bring in Jeff Hamilton shortly from the Winnipeg Free Press and take you all around the Canadian Football League, heading into another week of action in the three-down game. Big week recently. We'll hit all the action last weekend in the Canadian Football League. And we'll get into this week's games and, of course, hit the lines with our friends at Coolbet. Very nice week last week for the CFL 110 gang. We cashed the CFL 110 parlay, and we eliminated. The Calgary-Ottawa game was a little tough. We focused in on the other three, hit them all, got that boosted parlay. So shout out to everyone that rode with us at Coolbet. We'll hit the lines a little bit later on. Let's get right to it and welcome in, speaking of Coolbet, the champ of last night's WST poker series, none other than Jeff Hamilton. The Hammer running hot coming in to CFL 110 today. What's going on?
Absolute child's play last night, Huss. I'm ready for the big boy talk today. Let's get going.
Right on. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's obviously we're going to get into Winnipeg Edmonton kicking off the week on Thursday night at Princess Auto Stadium. But let's start off with the Elks, who had a week 2 bye, but find themselves 0-2 coming into this season, into this week, I should say. And listen, they had a road game against BC, and then a very tough game at home against, really, I think the team that so far through this season has been the standard in the Canadian Football League. Grey Cup favorites at Coolbet, the Montreal Alouettes. Jeff, there's a lot going on around this football team. Trying to really get back on positive momentum, both in their community, in the stands, and on the field. How concerning is this 0-2 start for the Double E as they head to Winnipeg this week?
Huss, are they succeeding at anything through 3 weeks in
so far,
2 games?
Not really.
I mean, and when I say everything, Huss, I don't mean just on the field. I mean, in the stands, correct me if I'm wrong here, I think there was about 14,000 people in the stands for that game. And I know that's kind of an issue going across the entire league, but this once proud franchise is seemingly taking another hit, and it doesn't seem to be getting any better anytime soon. We talked about this, Huss, at fairly great length heading into the season about all the moving pieces on the Edmonton Elks, you know, from new ownership, relatively new ownership, to new general manager, to entirely new coaching staff, as well as a bunch of new players on this roster. And while I think it created a lot of excitement for the organization, just given how difficult things have gone the last few seasons, the unfortunate part here is it's feeling very similar to those years. I mean, you look at their schedule, as you mentioned, they had a bye week heading into this game. They got beat pretty badly against BC in week 1, particularly in that second half with 4 straight touchdown drives by Nathan Rourke. But this most recent one, I get that it's Montreal Alouettes, and the Montreal Alouettes are looking every bit like that number 1 team we had in our early season power rankings. However, the Edmonton Elks had a bye week heading into this one. That gives them more time to get ready, to practice, to prepare for their opponent. And as good as the Montreal Alouettes are, they lost their number 1 quarterback in this game in Davis Alexander, and had McLeod Bethel Thompson come in relief and do pretty much next to nothing. And while this loss might appear close, 10 points, while clearly not impressive, is better. A 10-point loss is better against the Alouettes than any other team in this league. It took this team 22 points in the fourth quarter just to make it a 10-point game. So that, in consideration with the fact that you have a quarterback, I mean, I don't want to spend this segment, this current rant that I'm on, trashing Trey Ford, but the fact of the matter is he doesn't scream stability. And an organization that needs stability right now, I guess the code here, Huss, is telling Trey Ford that they're out of the game immediately upon kickoff to make him feel that they're down, because that seems to be the only thing that gets this team going, that gets this offense going. This team is in an absolute mess right now, and while they can still keep that early excuse of it's early into the season. Other teams are getting better too, while this team doesn't seem to be making any progress in any phase of their team.
Listen, I think there's a lot of pressure on Tre Ford. I mean, it's been well documented, the ups and downs that he's had early in his career. He is their guy going into this season, but he's got company, a Grey Cup champion in Cody Fajardo. And, Mark Kylam's there. I mean, they've got 2 games in. Listen, I thought that this would be somewhat of a work in progress. And, a bye week for a Montreal or a Winnipeg or a Saskatchewan at this point of the season, a little bit different than, in a lot of ways, starting from scratch for the Elks. And that's why, listen, I wasn't really surprised at what happened. And I do think, to your point, it was a serious case of putting lipstick on a pig in the fourth quarter, because that game wasn't close. And it did almost end up in one of the more epic backdoor covers we've seen in a long time. But listen, the Elks have a long way to go, and it's not getting any easier this week, coming to Winnipeg on Thursday night to take on the Bombers, although maybe they can take advantage of the fact that the Bombers are playing on a short week after their back-to-back against BC, which we'll get to in a minute. I do want to mention one thing on Edmonton, because let's face it, the status of the franchise and attendance is going to be a big story throughout the year as they look to get back to anywhere close to where they were in previous seasons before this real rough time for the franchise. This was the worst case scenario for an opening crowd for the Elks, in that you had the Edmonton Oilers go on that incredible 2-month playoff run. They had just been eliminated in the Stanley Cup final. So there was a collective hangover of sports fans to begin with in Edmonton. And then on top of it, I wouldn't doubt if most average sports fans were borderline broke after what comes in with a Stanley Cup playoff run, and certainly with the prices in Edmonton right now for people that are in. So listen, it wasn't a great situation. It also poured rain through most of the day before getting nice at the end. So I'm gonna wait to see if they can turn this around and start getting some positive momentum. But it's gonna start on the football field, and that's gonna start with Tre Ford. And that's why, Jeff, I kind of do think that we're getting into potential Fajardo territory in the next couple of weeks if they don't get in the win column in their next couple of games.
I think I'm with you, but I think I don't think that leash is super tight right now. Like, you don't go with this guy, you don't believe in him, and then abandon him after 2 losses, including a loss to the number 1 team in the league.
I'm thinking like 4.
I'm thinking 4 too. That's the number. But here's the thing, Hassan, not even to shift from Tre Ford, but just to kind of put a cap on this team, like, their own coach, Mark Killam, is hurting them, right? I mean, you look at some of the plays, the surprise onside kick. Again, it's like one of those things where it's like, do you forget that you're in the Canadian Football League?
Tell that guy was a special teams coordinator and thought that he had some special plays.
I get the idea of like trying the element of surprise, but you don't need it there when you have momentum. And sure enough, Montreal shoves it down their throats and goes all the way back down. There's the punt at the end, like nearing the end of the game, where it's just like, what are you doing? Like, you got to gamble here. Your team's not good enough to beat Montreal. And there was another couple, even just the decisions to not go for 2 point, like, it's just not understanding the math. Those things can compound when you're new, and again, those additional moving pieces of an organization. And it's bad enough when you're playing a team that's as good as Montreal. When you're shooting yourself in the foot a handful of times, there's no way you're going to beat them.
Let's move on to the top of the league here. The Bombers will have an opportunity to get to 3-0 against the Elks on Thursday night. But right now, there are 2 3-0 teams, and that's the Montreal Alouettes and the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Both perfect. Both have had some dominating performances. I think we can all agree that they're genuine contenders within the Canadian Football League with a 9-team. But when you look at these teams, Jeff, who is more sustainable? The Alouettes or the Saskatchewan Roughriders as to where they're at right now?
Yeah, right now it's got to be the Montreal Alouettes. I mean, they're getting the job done. Even with the 22 points against them against Edmonton, you're playing prevent defense. You're still protecting what ultimately turned out to be a 2-score victory. So, you switch over to the Saskatchewan side, and they have 3 games against 3 East opponents in Hamilton, Ottawa, and obviously Toronto, and they've all ended within by 1 score, within 1 score. They've been close games, and all 3 of those games have really been the Saskatchewan Roughriders playing down to their opponent. As you see, they've been outscored in every fourth quarter that they've faced this season, and allowed teams to come back into it. And the other part too is there's got to be better days for the Riders, and that's why at this point in time it is impressive that they have a 3-0 record here. But they, comparing them to Montreal, I don't even think they're in the same conversation despite having the same record. But again, when I say better days, I look at things like Trevor Harris was sick last game, right? He was under the weather. I think he attempted 17 passes. That has an effect. Obviously, he played, but a bigger one, Brett Lauther. Right? This is a kicker who had another missed crucial kick that made it a 1-score game and allowed Toronto to come back and march the field and score that 2-point convert to make it a tie game before obviously Mario Alford's heroics at the end there. So this is just a team that continues to shoot itself in the foot. I look at you look at the penalties, the lack of discipline that we saw from Saskatchewan last game, and 178 penalty yards in that game. So there are some signs, serious signs of things that this team needs to clean up, which would suggest them getting better. The other thing too, Huss, is when's that 7-game losing streak going to kick in?
Well, listen, I'm going to give Saskatchewan credit. You are what your record says you are.
Well, here's the thing, guys. We're giving them credit
business.
here. We're giving them credit here. We're talking about 2 of the best teams in the league.
I was just about to say, I'll give them credit. They are what their record is. But if you're asking me, playing on a neutral field this weekend, the Montreal Alouettes or the Saskatchewan Roughriders, I'm running to the window to back the Montreal Alouettes. To me, they are the team that has been the most complete. They really haven't been in any sort of trouble so far this season. And to your point, the Saskatchewan Roughriders have had some games where they're in it. But, you got to win those close games, and good teams win those close games. So I think there's another gear and another level that Saskatchewan has that they're going to have when they play the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, when they go up against Montreal. But I do certainly think that these are both Grey Cup contenders.
Oh, yeah.
But right now, nothing's changed at the top of that CFL power poll, at least through the 3 weeks of the season. I think Montreal is still the number 1 squad. Now,
we'd also be remiss too, Huss. Sorry to cut you off. We'd be remiss if we didn't recognize the injuries on Saskatchewan, right? They're eventually going to get healthy. And I will say this, the resurgence, if you will, of AJ Ouellette. I know I was tough on him, thought, maybe his career was in doubt after that injury early on. He's certainly proven to be the threat that I think we all expect him to be.
Well, and he's got some company there with Kadeem Carey. And, there's nothing that'll get the best out of players in professional football like hearing footsteps and having legitimate competition. And they've got a very, very deep quarterback room. Well, the other undefeated team is the Bombers. They're 2-0 after sweeping the BC Lions. Very interesting, Jeff, in that you had 2 completely different quarterback matchups. It was Chris Streveler and Nathan Rourke in the first week. And then in BC, Zach Caleros made his first start of the year. Rourke was out and Jeremiah Masoli came in. Now, when you break it all down, very similar results in both. The Bombers winning by double digits. And the Bombers 2-0, BC now 1-2, although looking to get Nathan Rourke back. What did we learn about these 2 Western Division contenders in this game? Certainly the Bombers, I think, new look, especially on defense, has maybe changed the narrative of this being an older team. And BC, I think, still has some work to do, but we have seen glimpses that this team can be very dangerous when Nathan Rourke is in the lineup and on. Where are you at on BC and Winnipeg coming out of last week?
Well, I'll pick up kind of where you just almost ended there with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers and the narrative around them being old. I've been guilty of it in the past. I've certainly, as covering this team for the last decade, particularly over their winning years, over the last 5 or 6 years here, there's been moments in time where you looked at the age of this team and you wonder when they were going to fall off a cliff, right? I've written those columns, but over the last 2 years, Huss, and as you noted, particularly on defense, this team has gotten younger. They're not I believe Saskatchewan is the oldest team in the league by the by the stats. This credit to Mike O'Shea and his staff and Kyle Walters and his staff for, refilling those cupboards and finding solutions. I know this year for them, the biggest issue, if you will, is their ratio flexibility, right? This is a team that for years has started 9-10 Canadians. Now they're only starting 8. Can you believe that, Huss? Like, they still have one more Canadian than you're expected to be starting. So you look at Winnipeg, and the real question here is, Huss, because I understand that Winnipeg has a target on its back. They're everyone wants them to lose. You're getting to a point now where it'd be nice even in here to see somebody else in the Grey Cup. Obviously, it's been very nice for my situation and my work having to pay for me to go to the Grey Cup every year because of this reoccurring dominance of this team. But this club really is special, Huss. Like, this is a team that they just get it, they understand it, they know how to win games, and they're Jordan Younger and what he's done on defense. That's an incredible group. And then the look at Zach Collaros. Back to the age component. Even the guys who are getting older in this league are some of the best players on this team and earn every rep. There's not a guy out there who's earning his spot based on seniority. And if you needed a better example than that, look at Adam Bighill, right? He's not even on this team this year. He's a guy who's an incredible bomber, has left an incredible legacy here in Winnipeg, including all those. I was going to say including 3 defensive MVPs, but of course one was in BC. But they've moved on, they've changed things. And so I think right now, if you don't think that the Winnipeg Blue Bombers are the best team in the West, you're telling everybody that the BC Lions suck, because that's essentially what we know out of this, is that the BC Lions, a team who, with Buck Pierce, is going to bring some accountability, all these things. They have talent. They have Nathan Rourke. This was a team that was expected to compete in the West. And the Blue Bombers, again, another team that was expected to compete in the West, but the narrative heading into this season was which team out of BC and Saskatchewan were going to finally surpass Winnipeg as the beasts in the West. And what we've seen through 2 games and against one opponent is a defense that has 8 turnovers, an offense led by a rookie OC and Jason Hogan, who it doesn't matter who your starting quarterback is. It doesn't matter who your starting running back is. It doesn't matter that you've lost a couple guys on the O-line, because you have a dominant group, because you have a guy who is putting in the work to pull out every last bit of skill in this offense. And when you look at the special teams, an area that's been consistent in the kicking game, but maybe has lacked in the return game, I think the Bombers have found a guy. In Vaval, is a guy that is going to give them the field position that they so desperately needed at times last year. So I'm looking, again, another rant here, Huss, but I think the Bombers are for real this year, but I'm hoping that the Saskatchewan Roughriders, their record pans out to be true and moving forward here, and BC can figure it out, because right now we need a competitive West, and I'm not 100% sure if we have it.
Takeaways from BC, first and foremost. I think there's going to be some ups and downs in Buck Pierce's first year on the sidelines. And listen, maybe this was a little difficult for him coming out of his week 1 win over Edmonton, going head-to-head with the team that he was employed by for the last number of years. And, of course, his understudy, Jason Hogan, taking over the offense, and I think doing a brilliant job of putting his players in positions to make plays and having the confidence in them, like Chris Streveler in the first start, to let him do it all, throw the football and make it happen. I did wonder whether there was any sort of bad blood or anything like that.
I was hoping you'd be throwing back to me, Huss, because that's where I was headed.
I wasn't exactly expecting, in the Bombers' second game of the season and back-to-backs against BC, Hogan to be calling the thick 6 big man touchdown to Tui Eli in a game that at that point was pretty much out of reach. But I think there's going to be some interesting back and forth between these teams all along, except for the fact that the season series is over, and we won't see Winnipeg and BC play again until later on this season. But just quickly, before I throw it back to you on that, very impressed with Winnipeg's defense. Jamal Parker's been brilliant, and I think Terrell Bonds. We were wondering, okay, you're losing Ford to Edmonton. This is a big loss. He was so good last year. Well, I got to tell you, both the corners have been brilliant. but in particular, the job that Bonds did on the sidelines against Hatcher and McInnes was so impressive. And I left that game feeling a lot more confident about the Bombers being at that level that they've been and the team to beat in the West after what their defense has done. And you mentioned special teams. Vivales had a great start in the return game. We'll see what happens when and if and Peyton Logan comes back. He was sort of being the guy that was thought to be in that position. But I'll say this about Winnipeg. So far, so good. And I think for people that were waiting for the fall off for this Winnipeg Blue Bombers team that had won 5 straight Western divisions with trips to the Grey Cup to show for them, you might be waiting a little bit longer because Mike O'Shea's group seems to be back better than they were last year and very motivated to play in that final game of the season at Princess Auto Stadium.
Yeah, you also got to give a hat tip to Jamal Parker too, man. That guy, he's taken over that safety position for Brandon Alexander and has done incredible work, including head on a swivel, picking up that backwards pass that turned into being a pretty much game-defining play there. The other, just to wrap it up, I mean, the season series, the fact that it's over, like that is such a significant get by the Winnipeg Blue Bombers this early in the season, because as we know, the seasons are long. They're a marathon, not a sprint. You go through ups and downs. You go through injury problems, all these various things that inevitably come up in a regular season in the Canadian Football League. And to have that main tiebreakers sealed already by week 3 against a team that you were expected to battle with and have battled with for years in that division is massive. And just as a final note to the point that I wanted to get to originally, while the Saskatchewan Roughriders are definitely the rival team of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and I'd put up there as one of the greatest rivalries in North American sports.
Absolutely.
The Winnipeg Blue Bombers and BC Lions despise each other. Like, they hate each other. Like, no one talks about it. It's not like, it's just the Winnipeg Blue Bombers despise the BC Lions. They think they're cocky. They think they're arrogant. They think they think they talk a lot. And you saw some of that bad blood play out, but the BC Lions return the favor. I think the irony is that the BC Lions are trying to be the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. The problem is they just haven't gotten there.
Well, we'll talk about both of these teams coming up in the picks. Listen, we talked about Montreal undefeated, Saskatchewan undefeated, Montreal undefeated. At the other end of the standings, they're the Grey Cup champs. 0-3, have not yet had the services of Chad Kelly in game action. Had a pretty thrilling comeback and 2-pointer to tie a game and potentially put it to overtime, and then give up a kick return on the next play with only 11 players on the field to find another way to lose. There's a lot to get to from this game, Jeff, but Ryan Dinwiddie was as hot and as animated I've seen a CFL coach in a post-game media scrum in years. What to make about this ugly start of the Argos? Now, I will put in the caveat. Let's not forget last year, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers started off 0-4 and then still managed to win their division and actually have the tiebreakers over their division rivals. But this clearly is not what the Argos were looking to do when they set out on this season. Where's the concern meter for the Double Blue?
I don't think it's all that concerning, Huss, at this point. And I don't take Ryan Dinwiddie's comments as panic or running towards that big red button.
They were entertaining.
Yeah, for sure. And I say that because the East Division is struggling. They're a win away from being in second place.
Yeah, it's Montreal and everybody else.
Yeah, exactly. And the only other team with a victory outside of Montreal is of course Ottawa, right? So and they just got it. So I think how I take Ryan Dinwiddie's comments is the same way I've taken Ryan Dinwiddie's comments since I started covering this league, as the honest truth of the matter. Like, he is, by whether you want to call him a great quote or however you want to classify him, he's just straight up and honest with everything he says. I mean, I think I've already mentioned it in this season of our CFL 110, Huss. Like, I go back to the Rasheed Bailey stuff. Right? Like, Rasheed Bailey was like a big pickup, and he was leading the team in receiving yards and had collected a couple touchdowns for the first few games of the season, and he was just cut. And of course, being from Winnipeg and my interest there was just like, why'd you cut him? He's like, because we have better guys. and it was Mackay Polk. And now that guy's catching balls for the Atlanta Falcons, I believe. So like, this is a guy who's just honest. And I think the frustration is coming out because Ryan Dinwiddie, as I've said before in this show and in hits on Winnipeg Sports Talk, is he's a brilliant coach. So that they are going to have game plans that they feel they can win, that Ryan Dinwiddie and his staff have been putting in the work for them to be successful. The problem is, Huss, it's finally catching up to them. I call it the Argos antics because the Argos are the kind of team that, they do kind of represent that viewpoint in football where we're here for a good time, not a long time when it comes to their roster. Like, they don't keep a lot of guys for very long. And so this, again, this year was another year of massive turnover. And when you factor in the fact that Chad Kelly's still not fully recovered from his broken leg, at least enough to be in the game, I believe that might come this week. You look at a lot of the turnover on defense and the loss of Winton McManus, the heart and soul of that defense in the last game. We'll see how long, if he misses another game, that would be significant. It's just all those pieces that usually come together are kind of figured out because they had a quarterback and an offense that was moving the ball. When you don't have a quarterback and an offense that is moving the ball, it puts extreme pressure on your defense to carry the extra load. And if your defense is continually on the field, they're just not going to be able to do that. So the Toronto Argonauts are at their best when their defense are at their best, and their defense are at their best when their offense is able to move the ball. That was the thing I was always impressed me about Chad Kelly, was that while he wouldn't necessarily dial up touchdown drives every single series, and I'd say the same thing for a guy like Zach Collaros in Winnipeg when their offense is humming, they at least move the ball. It's not 2 and out. It's usually switching the field. And those things do really help out your defense. And the reality is that Toronto's not getting much of, if any of that right now. And we're seeing it play out week in and week out here.
I'm with you. I don't have big concerns about the Argos. And as I mentioned, we saw the Bombers start off 0-4, get it together, and get back to the Grey Cup last year. Now, I do think that Montreal's the team to beat in the East, but I would be very surprised if the East Final is not the Montreal Alouettes and the Toronto Argonauts. And we'll get to our thoughts on this week's game, but I think that turnaround probably is going to come sooner and later. And Ryan Dinwiddie means business. And this team could look very different after Labor Day if guys aren't getting the job done. But I just have a feeling, he deserves the benefit of the doubt that they will find a way. And this team will be a problem at some point for the contenders. And listen, it's a long season. There's a lot of football left to be played. Don't be surprised if you see the Toronto Argonauts look more like the champions of last year than an 0-3 team that has really struggled to start the year. Listen, while we're on the Argos, we can move into a few quick hits because, one of the things about that Rough Rider Argonaut game that had, the comeback and the walk-off, kickoff return was the amount of laundry on the field, Jeff. There seemed like there was a penalty on every single play and a big player safety discussion as well coming out of it when you got 300 combined penalty yards and an illegal block on Duncan-Busby against Kenneth George Jr. that was dangerous, was ugly, and had a lot of people talking and really, I think, contributed to the chippiness of that game as it went through the 60 minutes.
Yeah, that conversation after that hit was, about the rule book and apparently being legit. I don't with being in the box, you're apparently allowed to throw those types of blocks hits. Obviously, the CFL disagreed with that as the command center came down and did issue an illegal block. So maybe that clears up the debate, or maybe it makes it even muddier. But the fact of the matter is, Huss, all you need to do is watch the highlight of that play to know that can't be in the game. This is to watch someone go after someone's knees like that, dive towards someone's knees, and to watch someone's knee bend backwards the way that it did in video replay tells you that shouldn't be in the game. So that needs to be garbage. Both those teams need to clean things up. But the fact is, the officials, I don't even blame them because a lot of those penalties were legit. It wasn't one of those they're calling a flag on every penalty. They're calling all this ticky-tacky play. No, a lot of those were aggressive plays and warranted the laundry, as you mentioned, littered across the field.
Just staying with a couple of the quick hits, we didn't really touch too much on the Ottawa-Calgary game, and, Ottawa gets a much-needed win, third game, third quarterback, taking advantage of some really ugly conditions at McMahon, and we'll get to Ottawa and how they look heading into this game against Toronto in a minute. But Vernon Adams, he's 3 games without throwing a touchdown. Now, again, he would take that knowing that they've won a couple football games, but it seems like they missed one. Just thoughts on where Calgary is right now coming out of that home loss after a nice 2-0 start. And we should also mention Adam Bighill, no longer unemployed and continuing his CFL career with the Calgary Stampeders after a weekend signing.
Yeah, look, I mean, you obviously have to talk about the weather in that game. It was trash. It felt like it was a deep fall kind of atmosphere, right? So when you factor that into, when you consider that and factor that into play, I mean, yeah, the loss isn't as horrible, but when you look at the fact that Vernon Adams, a guy who's known for his prolific plays, his ability to find the end zone, doesn't have a touchdown, hasn't thrown for a touchdown through 3 games, that is somewhat concerning to me. And I thought, they really messed up a big opportunity there, Huss, in this game against an Ottawa team that didn't outplay them per se. I mean, certainly at parts in the game, but had a quarterback who was in Dustin Crum, who was making his first start in 600 days. And so you look at a bunch of plays in that game, and Calgary's got to be, certainly is kicking themselves, particularly in the first half when they couldn't punch the ball into the end zone despite a couple different opportunities. Like, you use a guy like Dedrick Mills to get all the way to the 1 yard line, and then to have PJ Walker come out in third down and look every bit like a guy who wants to play in the NFL and not a guy who wants to get dirty in the CFL in his attempt and get stopped. I mean, that's just stuff that you can't have happen. And so, you started to see some cracks in Calgary, but, let's give them the benefit of the doubt after starting the season 2-0.
All right. One more quick one. We mentioned the Tui Ely touchdown. And we always love the big man TD, but what stands out to you more coming out of this weekend? The thick 6 by the Bombers putting it on the BC Lions, or Mario Alford's 99-yard touchdown after the Argos had just gone the distance, scored, hit the 2-point convert to tie the game in like the last minute of regulation?
In this case, I'm going to go with Mario Alford's. Just obviously the timing of the game, the fact that Toronto had just marched down the field, had converted the 2-point convert to tie it. Everybody viewed that game as inevitably going to overtime, and then for Mario Alford to rip off a 99-yard touchdown in a season, Huss, that we all thought that he might be replaced after the preseason. He's been nothing but great ever since, and what a touchdown. But you cannot take away how excellent of hands Tui Ely had in that play as Zach rolled out, kept pump faking to get the linebacker to distance him, only for another player to come into play right at that bit, and for Tui Ely to continue running that route and then to catch the ball on the fly the way he did. For a Dalton Schoen, that would have been impressive. For a man who is not known for catching touchdowns, it was also very, very, very incredible.
I'm with you. Tui and the Bombers get the Style Points Award, but winning a football game on a 99-yard kick return in the last minute, I think gets the nod for that. And one other thing, I did mention Adam Bighill, of course, signed to the Calgary Stampeders practice roster. The Stamps are on the bye this week. If my math is correct, their next game is the Stampede Bowl against, you guessed it, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. I know he's signed to the practice roster right now. What are the chances Adam Bighill is in the lineup for the Stamps against his old team on the 3rd of July?
I want to say not good, and I don't know why I feel that outside of the fact that it's only been about 10 months since his injury. So, I'm not sure where he is health. I just don't. And to be clear, I've said this, I've written this a ton of times. It's a fool's game to count out Adam Bighill and anything that he does. So I wouldn't be surprised if he was in that game. If the timing feels more like scouting reports than it does necessarily being an impact player. But credit to Adam Bighill, who obviously has a family here in Winnipeg and roots here in Winnipeg, for him to go out there, make that sacrifice to be on the practice roster in Calgary, in what is an obvious goal of his to not end his career, with an injury. A guy who's been known for his resiliency. So I wouldn't be surprised if he was playing, but I just, doing the math and understanding the situation with those kind of injuries, I also don't think it's a very good shot.
Yeah, listen, I have to agree with you that with any other or normal player, you'd probably think it's a long shot. I almost expect it, considering these teams. The fact that the game is against Winnipeg,
he's got to be close, though, right? I mean, you don't, would you bring a guy and put him on your practice roster? Would you be Adam Bighill and want to leave your family to be on a PR unless you were right around the corner? That's the other part.
Well,
right?
It's a great point. And you know what? I mean, congratulations. I saw the Bighills. They were celebrating, I guess, their oldest just finished elementary school.
Right on.
And again, he's a big family guy. Obviously, has a lot going on in Winnipeg. But that school year is just finished. The timing of this works really well. And we'll see Adam Bighill blow some guys up before the end of the season on CFL season. The fields, it'll just be a little strange that he's going to be doing it in the red and white of the Calgary Stampeders. Hammer, let's get over and take a look at the Week 4 lines. We'll get our picks. It was a great week last week. I was 4-0. I will admit I'm fortunate because I did take Ottawa early in the week, thinking Drew Brown was not going to be playing. I thought I was screwed as we went in, where they went to Dustin Crum, and lo and behold, that's why they play the games, folks. But a very, very good start so far for us. You were 3-1 last week, and now we get to the lines. And, as we do this on Tuesday, lines just out. I guess we got a glimpse at the Edmonton Winnipeg line yesterday on Monday, but now we've got 4 games, 4 days, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday for the first time, and we open it up in Princess Auto Stadium on Thursday. Coolbet has the line at Bombers -9.5. We led the show talking about the struggles of the Edmonton Elks, and guess what? It doesn't get any easier going on the road out east to Winnipeg and Princess Auto Stadium, where the Bombers have been incredible now for a number of years. I think a lot of pressure on Trey Ford going on. But as we heard from Mike O'Shea after the game, happy with the win, but still feels there's a lot to work on. And we can't forget this is a very short week for the Bombers, playing Saturday in BC and then being right back at it, albeit at home, on Thursday night. What do you think about this matchup, and who are you taking as the Bombers are 9.5-point favorites as we go to air?
Yeah, that's kind of where my head's at, is that short week by the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. But I do think it comes following, maybe they have a good system in place to, with their coaching staffs, to look at teams ahead of time. So I'm not thinking the game plan is going to take that massive of a hit or be as significant as it might be for another team. But I do think it's something to take into consideration for this game when you look at the points. The thing I look at, Huss, particularly with this one, is I don't see the Elks ever leading this game unless they can put something together early. And then I don't view the Elks, or maybe I'm looking more towards the Bombers defense as a unit that won't give up 22 points in the fourth quarter, or won't be a team that gives up that kind of yards or action, particularly points in the stretch. We've seen this Bombers team, particularly at home, when they put their foot on your neck, they usually finish the job. They don't let you kind of claw away and make it an interesting game. So in that respect, and playing in front of the home crowd, it's already over 30,000 fans. It's heading towards, if it's not already a sellout, it's probably going to get there come kickoff time. So in that respect, playing behind the big crowd, 9.5 points doesn't seem like a lot to me. It actually seems right in the range of where the Bombers should be. I don't think this is going to be the Bombers should win by more than a touchdown. To ask them to do it, to tack on a field goal to that, doesn't seem like a big ask in this week.
I hear a lot of what you're saying, and listen, I think the Bombers are and should be pretty big favorites. When I was on the lock shop yesterday with Dusty and we were guessing the lines, I thought the Bombers would be like a 7.5 or 8-point favorite, and now they're 9.5. And I think part of that is the fact that favorites have done so well against the line. And just like last week when we were here talking about Montreal as 4.5-point favorites and the Bombers and Riders as 2.5-point favorites, by the time those lines got to kickoff, they were significantly more. And I think the books and Coolbet have tried to beat us to that, to start off with that big line. Asking a team to beat another team by double digits is a lot. And listen, the Bombers are all about winning. Mike O'Shea doesn't care whether his team covers the spread, whether they're winning, running away. And I will say this, I think we saw that there's still a lot of work to be done for that Bomber offense and Zach Collaros. And let's not forget that they were going to be without Brady Oliveira, and that Bomber running game that was all over BC in the first game, I think came down to earth a little bit more. This is a really tough pick for me because I think they've nailed the line at a very, very good spot. I'm actually going to take the points with Edmonton in this one. And listen, this is not based on anything other than I think that we've had so many favorites win. I think this line might be a point or two high, and I think we might get back to, the water coming back to its level, maybe with an unexpected cover. So at this point, I'm going to take the 9.5 points with the Elks and see if they can keep it to single digits. You're muted, I think.
10 for 17 passing, 131 yards, 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions for Trey Ford the last time they played against the last game he played against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in Edmonton.
Yeah, well, listen, the Bombers against Trey Ford, against most teams in the West, have really had their way over the last little while. And you're right, it ain't an easy place to play. We're going to find out a lot about Trey Ford as to whether he's going to, be out there fighting for his job and showing glimpses that he can be the guy moving forward for Edmonton. Or maybe we're going to be talking about Cody Fajardo in the second half of this football game. Interesting way to start off the week for it. We move on to Friday's games, Jeff, with the Alouettes and the Hamilton Tiger Cats. Now, this spread on Tuesday is 2.5 for Montreal. That may indicate that Davis Alexander will not be playing. Even with McLeod Bethel Thompson, I think the Alouettes sort of are the favorite on this. And to be honest, I think with the time, because of, again, they said that the Alexander hook was precautionary. I think they're better off with MBT. Even if they're playing Hamilton with MBT, I think I would lean there. But I do think there's a chance that we might see Alexander later on this week. All that being said, when I look at these two teams right now and where they're at, to me, there's Montreal, there's a big gap, and then there's the Hamilton Tiger Cats. Now, maybe the Tabbies can take advantage of a backup quarterback, albeit one with a lot of CFL experience, and their home crowd, and get into the win column. Unfortunately for them, much like the Elks last week, I think they're just playing a team that's better than them, and I expect Montreal to win. And at this point, I do not mind at all the -2.5 that Coolbet's laid up for the road favorites.
I don't know how you could, to be honest with you, or how you could not be not like that line for Montreal, because you look at, of course, you want Davis Alexander in the game, and if Davis Alexander does play that game, that spread will move. I mean, that is to me an indication that, because Alexander wasn't able to practice on Monday, which I don't think is a big deal, especially when we know it's a hamstring issue, right? He's grabbed. It was kind of the same situation we watched Cody Fajardo do the year before, but it was much worse with Cody. Cody was grabbing his hamstring like it had completely ripped off, and of course he missed, I think, 4 games, which opened the door for Davis Alexander to be the starter and ultimately set forth the reputation of being a gamer in this league. So it is an interesting situation over there. I didn't love what I saw from McLeod Bethel Thompson. I just didn't. He looked, and I'm probably going to get gears. He looked horny there. He looked horny behind center. Like he just wanted to do so much so quickly. Like he looked so excited that he was back in the Canadian Football League that he didn't really utilize what I would argue is the best receiving core in the entire CFL. And I think that, to me, is the reason why, with a week of practice and preparation and easing those nerves, McLeod Bethel Thompson is going to be a lot better. He's going to be a lot more comfortable with those targets in the event that he plays. And if he doesn't play, even better. You have Davis Alexander. So sorry to be big and boring here a little bit, Huss, but I'm right there with you. I think the 2.5 is an obvious pick for me. And I think the Montreal Alouettes, who've had no problem winning on the road, is going to do that again against the Hamilton Tiger Cats team that's just struggling.
Yeah, 2.5 and -120 right now at Coolbet. bet. So you think that could easily get to 3. And I'll just lay a marker down. By the time this game kicks off on Friday night, I think we're talking about 3.5, maybe even 4. So I do like getting in early on the Montreal Alouettes right now. We've had some good success so far this CFL season doing that and hitting the lines right up early at Coolbet. This is a real interesting game. You got the BC Lions coming off those back-to-back losses against Winnipeg, going into Saskatchewan to take on the Rough Riders. We will wait to see if Nathan Rourke can come back after missing one game. It seemed like, they did call him a game-time decision. He was throwing the ball a little bit on the sidelines. Now they're 1-2. This is a huge divisional game going up against a team that has started off 3-1. I would imagine if Rourke is able to play, they'll have him out there. And of course, Saskatchewan, we talked about. Have they been incredibly impressive? At times, no. But 3 wins is 3 wins right now. Playing at home right now, they're a 5.5-point favorite against BC on Saturday. Jeff, what do you make of this big Western Division matchup with the Riders laying 5.5 at Mosaic Stadium?
Since the BC Lions have played only the Winnipeg Blue Bombers and the Edmonton Elks, one team that we believe is really good and one team that we've talked about as being not so great at all, we don't really know who the BC Lions are, right? We know they're better than the Elks, and we know they're not as good as the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, but where exactly do they fall in what seems to be a large difference between those two teams? We're going to have to wait and find that out. The 5.5 points to me, Huss, feels dangerous because it's less than a touchdown, but more than a field goal. Captain Obvious here. But I'm going back to my earlier statement. The Saskatchewan Roughriders, through their 3-0 start, have played down to their competition and have resulted in tight games all around. And I just think if you can go down to the wire with a Toronto Argonauts team the way they did, I think you can go down to the wire against a BC Lions team that will understand how important this game is in the West Division. They'll be a bit more desperate. And if Nathan Rourke can play in that game, that is the difference to me, because Jeremiah Masoli is not it. He's just not the guy that I would put confidence in to bet on. And it feels like one of those, if we don't know exactly who's starting for the BC Lions. But again, I do think when you look at how close the opponents have been against Saskatchewan this year, I see this as another tight game. I'm not saying Saskatchewan doesn't win this one and improve to 4-0, but I think BC makes it a game. And for that reason, I'm going to be putting the points on BC.
Yeah, listen, I kind of have to agree with you on this one. I do think that these teams, are maybe a little closer than the point spread indicates. Obviously, part of that is baked in uncertainty about Nathan Rourke. But I'm with you. Even this early in the season, they've just lost 2 to the Bombers. They've lost the series. They're 1-2. They lose, they'd go to 1-3. You're talking about the Riders being 4-0 and Winnipeg potentially being 3-0 by the time that they play that football game. So this is a huge, huge game for BC. Listen, I do think it's a work in progress for Buck Pierce in his first year on the sidelines. But there's a lot of talent on this team, and I do think that Nathan Rourke will do everything he can to play. And I think if Rourke plays, then this game is going to be much closer than this point spread indicates. So at this point on a Tuesday, I'm going to give the nod to BC. We've talked a lot about the trend of favorites winning so far. I think this is going to be one of these road underdogs to cover. And tell you what, that game on Saturday night, I think, is going to be a real fun one to watch. And I expect it to be very much up in the air in the fourth quarter. And that's why I'll take the road team with the 5.5.
And Lothar will give us the cover, right? He'll ensure the cover no matter what.
Don't mention Brett Lothar. You're triggering any Rider fans that are watching us right now. I had Dunk on the program last week on Winnipeg Sports Talk. And
the ultimate Rider.
He asked me, he was like, well, after that win, what do you think everyone was talking about? And I kind of jokingly said, well, they're probably planning the parade route right now. He's like, oh, no, far from it. Brett Lothar, and they're all over him right now. And listen, he's got to be better. He's a veteran kicker that's had a great career. He had a rough start to the season and then, had the opportunity to ice that game against Toronto last week and missed it, making it 8-point game. And lo and behold, what happened? The Argos came down. They scored. They tied it up with a 2-point convert, and they could have absolutely lost that game, which is another reason, I think, to maybe like BC with the points, even if it's in somewhat of a backdoor nature. So we're both on the 5.5. Here's the really interesting one. Toronto at Ottawa, a Sunday game, our first Sunday game of the year. It's a 6 p.m.er. Most people will be enjoying an extended long weekend here in Canada, so you got something to watch on Sunday night. Long week for the Argos to prepare for Ottawa. Ottawa coming off their first win of the season. They've played 3 different starting quarterbacks. You'd have to think they hope they get Drew Brown back. I'm not necessarily thinking that Chad Kelly is going to be in here, but we know that there's going to be changes based on what Ryan Dinwiddie had to say. Toronto at Ottawa. Ottawa, 2.5-point home favorite against the 0-3 defending Grey Cup champs. Where you at?
This really does feel like, well, at least for me, I need to know if Chad Kelly's playing this game, because I mean, I don't think Ryan Dinwiddie's comments post game is going to lead to Chad Kelly necessarily being healthier this week. I don't think there's desperation at play here, and I do think the fact that they're in Ottawa might affect that. That it isn't a home game, that they're not in the comforts of their own facilities. That being said, if he's good to go, the change in location is not going to be an issue as to whether he plays. So I do think I factor that in big time, and I factor the same thing into Drew Brown, who's probably more likely to play in this one, just given, his I think he was close last week. I mean, that's what we're led to believe. So I don't love this game. I honestly kind of hate it. But since we have to make picks here, I'm going to go with the home team. I think this is a close game. I also think if you are interested in this game and you do believe, if I were you and you like Ottawa, I'd be looking at reports for Chad Kelly, and I'd be looking at reports for Wynton McManus, because if both those guys are out, I think that Ottawa playing at home in front of their home crowd has had success there. I do think that to ask them to win the game by a field goal is not a huge ask. I think it's a bigger ask for the Argos to do the same.
Maybe I am putting more into the post-game eruption of Ryan Dinwiddie. Maybe I'm giving them too much credit for being the defending Grey Cup champs.
Maybe I'm not giving it enough, man.
I think the Argos win this game outright. I think, and even if it's Nick Arbuckle going in there, I think that there is going to be a sense of urgency for the Toronto Argonauts going into that game, that they will find a way to win. And we've seen them win with backup quarterbacks before. I don't need to remind Bomber fans about that, going back to Vancouver last November. And listen, I think that Ottawa is in, I think the temperatures come down in Ottawa just with that win. And regardless of how you got it and who was the quarterback, I think they're in a much better situation. If Drew Brown wasn't able to play last week, the fact that they got that win, I think they maybe give him a little bit more time. That being said, I kind of expect Drew Brown to play, but I do think the Argos are going to look far more like the team that people saw in the Grey Cup than the team that we've seen struggling so far this week. So I will take the 2.5 points, and I think I am going to take the Argos at plus 120 on the money line. I'd be surprised if we're talking about an 0-4 Argonaut team next week when we do this program.
Since I'm trying to convince myself that the Ottawa Red Blacks are the better play, and so I'm going to add to that and say, I thought I was impressed that Ottawa was able to go into Calgary, a team that was 2-0 this year, and bad weather, which I think was the great equalizer in a lot of ways against Vernon Adams. But they gutted out a victory. Their defense played well, had big stops. And when it looked like it was just a matter of time before the Stampeders would take over, the Red Blacks had an answer. And the last thing I'll say about Ottawa, which I liked this past week, was that Tommy Condell actually established a run game. Now, he was forced to establish a run game because it was very difficult to pass and catch the ball. But you had William Stanback come in for a handful of runs, and I think he finished with 80 or 90 yards. And Daniel Boyaboyu, I don't think I nailed that name. If I did, great. came in and it was like a 1-2 attack. I thought it was a terrific way to handle the run game. And if they can open the run game up, because we all know how much Drew Brown loves to pass the ball and how accurate he is. If they can establish their run game, this could be a dangerous offense. And I think that's really what's been missing in Ottawa for a chunk of these years, is just that consistency on offense. So I'm liking my pick more, assuming that Drew Brown can establish his health again and be behind center for that game.
All right. Well, last week, and again, folks, head on over to Coolbet and check out the lines right now. We put up our CFL 110 parlay last week on Monday. Got it at more than 6-1 with the line movements, including the boost. It was down to about plus 430 by the time that, the games went off. So we got into a great spot early on. Let's see if we can go back to back for the people here, Hammer.
Okay.
We both like Montreal at minus 2.5. We both like BC at plus 5.5, but we're on opposite sides of the Elks Bomber game. And we're on opposite sides of the Argonauts Red-Black game. We do have a couple totals. 50.5 in the Elk Bomber game. And 52.5 in the Argos Red-Blacks game. Any thoughts on the total there? Or is there a game? I mean, have you thought enough that it might be worthwhile having Toronto on the parlay, knowing that if we have the first two, you could get in on Ottawa on the other side and guarantee yourself a nice weekend? What do you think?
So are you asking me to bend on the Toronto pick and possibly go there, and you don't want to at least entertain the idea that you have the Edmonton Elks on your side?
The Elks,
you really do you think that Trey Ford is going to come in to Winnipeg and cover? Because if you feel like that, I mean,
under maybe in that.
Maybe we can give ourselves a bit more credibility here on this podcast as being two Winnipeg guys by maybe leaning into your pick and taking the Elks as the points. It's just whether or not you're going to want to show up next week, and the Bombers put up a 25-point win, and you had the struggling Elks in our first segment as your guys.
I do. When in doubt, I usually go to games not involving the Bombers because
you're right. That's fair. That's fine.
But listen, if you were now again,
I could live with your Toronto pick. I could live with it. But I do think that I just hate the overs. The 50s are such killers. Like I could see,
these guys are so good. Like it's 50.5 and it'll be 51.
Well, the thing is,
or
like
50. I mean, it's like
people are getting sick of my personality comments when it comes to games, but over under is a personality thing. Like it is. If games go certain ways, like teams chuck it, teams do certain things. It could be 6-3 after the first quarter. It could be a 65-point game. That's the CFL in a nutshell. So for me, there's no unders that I love in that situation, but I do think that it goes over in Winnipeg.
All right, so we're looking at we can get 50.5. We could take over 50.5. Or you know what? I could just saddle up and say, you know what? I'll take the Elks for the official pick. But I mean, listen, I could totally see the Bombers winning by double digits.
Yeah,
I mean,
and I'm not.
done it in their last
to be
two
clear,
games.
maybe this helps you out a little bit more. I'm not going to make it an issue next week if we lose the ticket based on this, because I'm with you. I think it's very difficult to pick these games, and I think if it was going to, as you mentioned, winning by double digits is significant in this league. And maybe it's a 9-point win by Winnipeg or an 8-point win by Winnipeg with a backdoor cover in the fact that the Bombers are too tired at the end of the game on a short week. So let's take the Elks with the points.
All right,
and finish off that ticket.
All right. Okay, so we're going to throw this up today, and it'll be open until kickoff on Thursday. Elks plus 9.5, Alouettes minus 2.5, and BC plus 5.5. And I'll maybe put together a little ride with Huss in there for you for that Argos Red Blacks game on Sunday night. But it's been a great start to the season. We nailed that sucker last week. I know Pat, Jake, and the Coolbet boys will give us a nice boost. So when you're watching this, head on over to coolbet.com, check out the combo cards for our CFL 110 parlay, and We'll see if we can keep it rolling. Hammer, great stuff. Enjoy the games this weekend. And I guess with Canada Day being on Tuesday, we'll have to do next week's show on Wednesday, July 2nd. So a week from today, if you're looking, where the hell's my CFL 110? Just be patient. We'll crank things out. We'll have a new episode for you on Wednesday, July the 2nd. Tell a friend about CFL 110, where you can find it available on your podcast platforms and, of course, right here on YouTube on Winnipeg Sports Talk every week. Big thanks to Michael Remus behind the scenes, producing us. And, of course, we'll see you at Princess Auto Stadium potentially on Thursday. And look forward to another great week of Canadian Football League action. We'll see you next Wednesday, July 2nd, for the next edition of CFL 110. Have a great weekend, everybody.
You've been listening to CFL 110. Tune in next week for more great Canadian football discussion.